This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you're listening to the Q&A with A.P.C., the show that features conversations with artists, cultural figures, policymakers, performers, and other innovators living in Virginia. Episode 7, Jesse Scaccia, Part 2. Jesse Scaccia is the editor-in-chief of the online publication AltDaily. In 2012, Jesse ran for Norfolk City Council. Although he lost the election, he has continued to work with the city on several projects. One of those projects is Norfolk's new Neon District, which officially opened to the public in October. You can listen to part 1 of my conversation with Jesse, where we talk about the origins of the Neon District and losing the city council election, by going to soundcloud.com/QAAPC. In part 2, we talk about growing up, his family, college, his many jobs, past relationships, and much, much more. This episode was recorded at Jesse's apartment in downtown Norfolk. It was October, it was at night, and the windows in his apartment were open. You were born in Connecticut?
Yes.
Your dad was from Queens, New York, and he worked for a lock and alarm company?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What kind of locks and alarms?
Well, I mean, I think he just did like the lock on your house and very basic alarm systems.
Like residential?
He also did the alarm systems for the sub base that was in Connecticut, or so he told me. My dad was a storyteller, so you never knew quite what was fully true and what
there
was
were some
what was a Scacciaism.
Some family connections and some perhaps like far-fetched stories from time to time.
Yeah, I believe him. I mean, they never got that crazy. I mean, my dad told me he helped invent the contact lens, which totally seems like something that Mike Myers' character would would claim. But yeah, my dad was a really interesting guy.
Do you wear contacts?
No.
Do you wear glasses?
No.
That's interesting. I feel like anyone that was born from, 2000 onward is always going to need contacts or glasses and is always going to need braces. As someone who has children now, I feel like I cannot imagine anyone going to the eye doctor or to the dentist and them not saying, you're going to need braces. And because we could always like have straighter teeth, we could always see better. Have you had your eyes checked recently? Because you probably need glasses also.
I probably did.
Your mom was from the Midwest?
Yeah, St. Louis.
And she lives in St. Louis now?
Yes.
She works for the symphony?
Yes.
What does she do for them?
She's the essentially the secretary to the executive director of the symphony in St. Louis.
Are you a classical music fan?
I don't play it very often, but I can appreciate it.
You appreciate opera a little bit, don't you?
Sure.
A good Italian man, right?
Yes.
You have an older sister?
Yes.
And a younger sister. What does your older sister do? Where does she live?
She's an actress in Chicago. She's a comedian and actress. And my little sister just moved back to St. Louis, and she's a psychologist. And her husband is a pharmacist, so really close to the drug ring that has been the Scaccia destiny for a long time.
What kind of acting does she like?
She's worked with Second City and all those kind of improv groups, but ends up doing a lot of commercials and that kind of stuff to pay the bills.
Awesome. And you talk to your younger sister? Does she break it down for you in terms of her skills? She's a therapist.
I think she became a therapist to understand the rest of our family.
Do they need to be understood?
We've all needed some ironing out over the years.
You went to 3 different middle schools and 3 different high schools?
Yes.
Were they all in Connecticut?
No, bounced back and forth to St. Louis as well.
Okay. What's the story with that?
Financial instability in my parents' household.
Did your mom, was she home with the kids? Did she have a job growing up, or?
Well, she had to get a job at some point and worked for the library and did programming for them.
What was your first job?
I caddied like 3 times and then realized I was going to hit one of those rich assholes with a fucking club if I kept doing it because I did not like how they talked to me. And I worked at a gas station.
That was my first job. I worked at a AMCO, AMOCO gas station.
Nice.
What was yours?
Exxon.
Oof. That's a tough one, man. The Valdez. Who were you in high school? Like, who was your crew?
Well, going to 3 high schools, I was often the new guy, so that's sort of a nebulous. And I was quite brooding and quite angry about the way that my childhood unfolded. So one of those horrible kids or people where they're an angry victim, I think was a lot of who I was.
Could you talk to your parents about your feelings
At that time?
Yeah.
No, I mean I did not have the emotional or self-awareness to navigate that kind of stuff. I would write. I think that I would try to push through it with writing, but the world is so out of your control as a child, and your emotions are so out of your control. So I think a lot of it was just holding on and trying not to let the anger and depression take me under. So I played football, I played lacrosse, I wrote.
Did they communicate with one another? Your
My
mom?
parents?
Yeah.
Well, they got divorced when I was in 8th grade, and then, they stayed relatively friendly, but my mom took us to St. Louis to live, and then after a year of that, I moved back to Connecticut with my dad.
You were given the choice?
No, I chose to go back with my dad.
Yeah. Did your sister stay in St. Louis?
Yeah, she stayed in St. Louis. The situation wasn't very good in St. Louis, so I needed to look after myself.
So you spent a summer, we're sort of jumping ahead, but you spent a summer in Yosemite National Park?
Yes.
What'd you do there? Well, like, what age was that?
So I kind of decided I was going to try to I was really into Kerouac, in high school and all of the beats and that sense of, you just get your rucksack and you find a highway and
blaze a trail, man.
You see where it takes you. So I decided I was going to do something different and live someplace different every summer of college. So my first summer I lived in Yosemite National Park and worked as a dishwasher.
And during the day, you were a dishwasher at night. During the day, you wrote, you walked, you thought.
Yeah, I mean, I mainly did the day shift. So I would, but it was long summer nights in California.
That sounds like there's a story there, Jesse. But and then the next summer it was you went to Florida.
Yeah, taught swimming to 3-year-olds, and she worked on the Everglades on an airboat, giving croc tours. So I would often be out there with her.
And you saw the crocs? You saw the crocs yourself? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
There are some hitchhiking episodes around this time.
Yeah, and it feels like so long ago because I can't imagine people doing it now. But I hitchhiked from Yosemite through Nevada. I've hitchhiked. I've done more hitchhiking in Europe, probably because it's more acceptable there. I hitchhiked from, or is it Paris to Amsterdam, and I think back. Hitchhiked from Amsterdam to Frankfurt. I've hitchhiked in South Africa.
When you were hitchhiking in the States, was it out of necessity or was it out of, I don't know, just taking a journey?
Yeah, my best hitchhike trip was up the West Coast from San Diego to Vancouver. And there was a little bit of bus or something else in there. But no, I mean, I could have bought a bus ticket at any time with all of these trips. But I found that the people who would pick you up when you're hitchhiking are some of the best people that you're going to meet. Just that trust and that openness to let a stranger into your car really taught me a lot about what trust can do to a person.
John Waters wrote a book, I think last year. He hitchhiked across America.
Oh, cool.
And I haven't read it, but he was on sort of the media tours and talking about it, and said very much the same thing that you said. I mean, certainly there was a few odd birds from time to time, but he said very much sort of the same thing, at least in the interviews that I heard. You went to a Jesuit school in St. Louis. afterwards?
Just for a couple of years before I realized that I was going to have to repay the student loans that I'd signed up for.
What is it? I'm not familiar. What is the Jesuit school?
Well, they're a sect of Catholic. So, I mean, it was a proper college.
What was the name of that college?
St. Louis University.
And what were you studying there?
Nothing. I mean, I thought I was going to be a teacher, so there was English classes and
Okay.
that kind of thing.
And this was undergrad still?
Yes.
Okay. And then you transferred to your state school,
Yes.
UConn.
Yes.
Go Huskies? Yes?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, sure.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a no. How was that?
I mean, it was cool. I felt more sane going to my state school. Once I had the revelation that I was going to have to repay the loans, which I'm never going to pay back. I'm still over 100,000 on my student loans at 36.
Right.
So there's no light at the end of that tunnel.
Are you chipping away at it, or are you just
I
saying?
suppose. No. Oh yeah.
fuck it?
I pay it. Because the phone calls give me too much anxiety to not pay it. So
Those envelopes, when they come, my wife has some. I guess it's my student debt too now, I suppose, because we're married. But so I have some student debt by proxy, and I get the envelopes in the mail. And I agree with you that it's very stressful, and that is something I feel like I hope the next president. And that's something that is sort of bubbling around in the national sort of conversation more than I think it has ever before. So hopefully something will come of that.
I mean, it's really a totally different world. Growing up, my grandpa, who I think was a very reasonable man, used to tell me that there are two investments that you can always count on: real estate and education. And I think that was prevailing wisdom. And it's totally bullshit now. You know, if I had a kid, I would not suggest that they go anywhere but a state school in which they can get in-state tuition, and even then, make sure you get a scholarship. We've really transferred to less of to more of a skill-based society, where writing is a great example. Where if you can write, you can write. It doesn't matter where you went to school. And as a web developer, it doesn't matter if you went to MIT. If you can do the work, you can do the work.
Is college still important? Because that's a question for you, and it was also, I know that you read the New Yorker. There was an article, I think 2 weeks ago, about a book review. Is college still important? So is college still relevant?
Exploring is important. Exposing yourself to people and ideas and really diving into them is important. And I don't think that most people have the discipline to give themselves that sort of experience without the structure of college. But it's really just about experiencing and diving into ideas and really it's not what you learn at college, it's that you learn how much you don't know.
Right. It's interesting. We have a family friend whose daughter is going to George Mason. They live in Virginia Beach. She's going to George Mason in Fairfax, so state school. And they got the bill for the first year, and it was something like $20,000, which includes room and board, just for 1 year. And they thought initially that was for all 4 years, and then they realized it was for 1 year. And it got me thinking. I think when I went to college in the late 90s, it was something like maybe $7,000, and it's like more than tripled. But it's weird because I feel like college is not as important or as relevant, or certainly doesn't guarantee you anything.
No,
and so it's weird that they're almost able to get away with charging so much more, but yet the return on that investment seems to be so much less.
I don't think the cost of education is reflected in a market reality. Completely agree with you, and I think it's a lot of that is gatekeeperism of the upper classes. College has been your ticket to the middle class, and so they keep having to raise that gate to allow less people in the middle class so that they can keep the wealth for themselves.
Did you finish at UConn?
Yeah, I got an undergrad and a master's degree there
In
secondary education, English.
Did you teach after school, or did you go to Europe straight away after?
Well, I just went for a summer and studied abroad in Florence, so I was very lucky to do that.
And then after that, you spent a summer in the Hamptons. You sort of interned. Well, you did intern at a local newspaper, which is
one of my friends' parents had a condo in the Hamptons that they let us crash at, and then started as an intern, got promoted to managing editor of a little paper called the Montauk Pioneer.
And was that your first sort of experience, journalism, and sort of working for?
Yeah, I think it was. And I hadn't planned on being a writer at that point or trying to get a job at a paper. I had nothing better to do when my buddy went in for his interview at the paper. And so I just came along and they were like, "Well, do you want a job too?" So I said yes.
There's some actor stories that go along those same lines. So how long did you work there?
It was just for a summer.
A summer. Did you want to stay?
No, no. I mean, it was a great paper, and I loved the people. I loved the editor there, Dan. Um, Dan's Papers is the parent company, but no, I'm not made for the Hamptons.
Then you went to Capitol Hill in D.C. and worked. You taught English.
Yeah, I taught Korean children speak English in DC for a summer.
Around what year are we talking now?
I don't think in years too much. So I think like 2000. I think it was. Yeah.
How was that experience?
It was great. I love DC. That was my first. All my friends worked in politics, so it was nice to be that close to the decision makers. One of my best friends was Boehner's right-hand man for years and years. So it was very interesting to get that insider's perspective.
Did you move to DC by yourself?
I had friends there, but
Okay.
yeah. I've moved a lot of places myself, though. I've always had faith that I can find a life and make friends. And
Have you ever lived by yourself, like in an apartment? Or have you always had a roommate?
pretty much had I lived in New York City by myself for a little bit. But,
How long is a little bit?
6 months. I've mostly had roommates.
Why?
Money. I'd like to live alone, but
Would you?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I end up interacting with so many people for my job and in my life that it's nice to come home and just be able to defrag and listen to my own and just breathe and stretch and things like that.
You graduated from UConn. You went to the Hamptons, worked for the paper. Went to DC. Then you had a job at ESPN in Connecticut.
Yes.
Is it like the ESPN campus, like the building like they have on those Sports Center ads, like with the parking lot? And is the coffee room like the actual coffee room? And are those the actual cubicles
Yes,
on
it
those
is.
Sports Center commercials?
My job it was for ESPN News is where I worked, and I would have to be watching like 7 football games at once, and like figuring out what's the next milestone or what's the next interesting tidbit.
Oh,
that
like a
could-
statistician almost. In a way.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I would be looking at the script, and when one of my games would come up, I would have to write down an interesting tidbit. And then when they went from the sportscaster to the clip, I would have to crawl behind the sportscaster's desk and just hold up a card. And so the viewing audience couldn't see me, and they wouldn't even look at me. They would just reach down, take the card, and read it while they're watching the highlight.
Oh, well, no wonder you've soured on sports then. So that was like live on the air, because like
Yes.
ESPN News is sort of almost like ESPN3 almost, whereas like ESPN is 1 and then ESPN2, and then ESPN News is sort of like the it's just kind of like the scrolling updates, too many bars on the top and bottom of the screen, kind of 24-hour news, like grasping at
Yes.
anything. And
Yes.
you were the one providing them with that information.
Yes.
But that sounds fun.
It was awesome.
It sounds
It was horrible and awesome.
It sounds, yes, exactly. It sounds a little belittling, but it sounds also kind of exciting. So how long did you work there for?
That was like 5 or 6 months, I think.
How are the anchors, personally?
They were fine. I mean, nobody was such a jerk. I mean, Stuart Scott was nice. I mean, they were all nice. I don't think anyone really lost so much sight of. I mean, things have gotten worse. I mean, that was a good 10 years ago now. And I think ESPN has gotten much bigger, and sort of the cult of sports has turned a little bit from rah-rah towards celebrity worship. So, but at the time, I think it was still a relatively modest organization in the way that people carried themselves.
What was Bristol, the town, like?
It was ESPN and then just a very nonsense, whatever kind of small town.
Well, like Hershey, Pennsylvania, almost, where it's like this one big thing, and it's
Yeah.
all.
It's a company town.
And everyone lives. All the anchors live in Bristol, or they kind of. Do some of them live in like they commute?
Hartford, I
Okay,
guess, or
yeah. Any ESPN parties?
No, I wasn't that cool.
Oh man, but there were. So you just weren't invited.
Yes, I assume so. I always assume that there's a party that I'm not invited to, just raging right outside.
Well, there probably is a party outside that you're not invited to. I guess the question is, would you want to attend that party? So that maybe you should think about that. That might help. NYU, you got another degree at NYU, master's degree at NYU.
Yes,
In
in magazine journalism.
Oh, that's very specific, isn't it?
They make you pick newspaper or magazine. I mean, I went with magazine.
What were your peers like at NYU in the magazine publishing
Really
school?
smart, really ambitious. And that's a place where I don't know that I learned anything except that I could hang.
Mm-hmm.
Being taught by people who'd won Pulitzers and been editors of major publications, just knowing that I could be a part of that conversation, it was really empowering and really changed the way that I saw myself.
You had the chops that you could keep up with.
I could, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of money to pay for a little external validation, but it's what I needed at the time.
I'm going to say a phrase to you, Jesse, and I don't know how you're going to take it. South African ballerina. What went through your mind when I said that phrase? And I don't mean to be jokey about it. You know, I'm interested because there are certainly stories to be had.
No, really just heartbreak and I don't know, to be honest, like not being sure if I ever really got over. I was engaged to a South African woman who happened to be a ballerina at the time.
You met her in New York?
Met her in New York. She was part of the South African Ballet Theater, which is sort of their big national ballet company, and then was in New York auditioning for American ballet companies, and then has since gone on and gotten a master's in business and is running a nonprofit in Johannesburg. So she just got better and better, unfortunately. But so we were engaged and smitten and in love, but her parents didn't want her in America, and there was a little bit of Romeo and Juliet-esque between her family not wanting us to be together, and she got deported. I mean, ironically, she came to Norfolk to intern with PETA, which we can see outside my window right now, and got deported because she got a stipend for it that she wasn't allowed under her visa, and got sent back and was never let back in America.
Well, back up a little bit. How did you meet her? How was
just at a bar.
There is something about accents.
Yeah, especially that one. It's a pretty one.
It is a pretty one. It's kind of a hard one for me to place sometimes. I feel like it has quite a few that sort of come together with it. When you found out that she was a ballerina, there's something very exotic about that to me.
Well, actually, the first night I met her, we'd been both had been drinking, and it was a loud bar, and I don't think I'd ever met a South African before, so I didn't pick up on the accent intuitively. So I thought she was a belly dancer until our first date.
Because like it was lost in translation because of the noise.
Well, ballet
yes.
in a South African accent sounds a lot like belly.
Got
so
it.
I was like, all right, she's a freaking gypsy. I can be down with that. And then we met up again, and she was a ballet dancer.
And that's so much better than belly. No offense to any belly dancers, but that is
no offense to any gypsies listening to the podcast.
You lived in South Africa for a while, and you did some pretty serious work with young men.
I had a couple stints there. You know, I probably spent 11 months total over 4 trips. The first 2 trips were the first one was to meet Catherine's family, and then the second trip was after she was deported and broke up with me. I went to win her back. So she couldn't handle it, so I said, then I'll come there, and was on a flight within 24 hours.
Were they apprehensive of you / American males before you met, or was it you met and then they're like, well, I don't know about this guy?
It was probably a little both. I mean, she was the youngest and the daughter and this beautiful ballerina, so they were very protective of her. And I wasn't, I was a 24-year-old man. I was still full of piss and vinegar and anger from my childhood, and was never a meathead idiot, but I could see why they had concerns. But then I went back, so I went there to meet her family. I went to win her back, and then I went back 2 more times because I fell in love with the country, and worked at a home for young men. So did a lot of tutoring and mentoring, and ran a mobile soup kitchen. Took the guys on camping trips because a lot of them hadn't really been out of the urban area. So we did a lot of really cool exercises where we helped them detach from their past, because all of them had, grown up on the streets or in gangs or been to jail. So it was really important for them to forge new identities. So we kind of did some exercises that helped them forgive themselves and to move forward.
Was the staff in the home or in the facility, were they South African? Was it sort
It
of
was
a
a mix.
hodgepodge of,
Yeah.
of people? You had a really wonderful blog post around Christmas time. This is like 2008, maybe, I want to say, when you were living out there and you were talking about gifts and you sort of had a list of things that friends or family could send. And it sort of broke down in terms of the dollar amount and then what it could provide them, and also gave a context, not only what it could provide, but how the impact and the sort of the newness of a lot of these things would have.
And it's having done work like that that makes me wrestle with things like the arts district. It's really important in its own way that this city here in Norfolk is beautiful and inspiring, and that tourists have something to visit, and that all these disenfranchised kids who are not straight arrows destined for the military feel at home here. And I think the arts district has provided that sense of home and belonging. It's rough out there. There's billions of people in poverty that I think we all have a real responsibility to.
You did some sailing in Holland. You were working in an organic farm in Ireland. You milked goats.
Mm-hmm.
You answer that so nonchalantly because those are certainly things that people don't fucking do, Jesse. They don't go sailing in Holland and milk goats and work in organic farms in Ireland. There was some real personal heavy stuff that happened sort of right before that.
Well, I've later learned this in the last couple of years in taking classes at the Push Comedy Theater of philosophy of yes and, which I think is something that I adopted long before I took improv classes. But I've always just tried to, if there's an opportunity, like, don't worry about it. Like, don't be guided by anxiety. Don't be guided by no. Be guided by yes. And so when I was in South Africa, my father passed away. He had a heart attack. It was his first heart attack. And one of the guys I had volunteered with was Dutch and was working on a ship and had a role for a mate, and said, well, when you're done here, after you go to the funeral, you're welcome to come to Holland and work on the ship with me. And it didn't pay anything. It paid, but not enough to really cover my flight and expenses, but I could kind of skate by. And the way it worked is the guests were the crew, essentially, and you taught them and led them, and so you would get meals whenever there were guests taken care of. So I just said yes, and I'd never been on a sailboat before. I'd never even been on one, and it really showed. I was a horrible sailor, and after about 4 months, it was the only job I've ever been fired from, completely rightfully so. There's just so many angles. Like, the ship is pointed one way and the wind's coming from the other, and the sail is angled. Have you sailed?
I have.
I mean,
a little bit. Yeah, my father we had a few sailboats, small, like 19-foot sailboats, and we spent many summers in very humid Washington, D.C. air on the Potomac River going nowhere. So yes, but I know a few of the terms.
And he would yell at me in Dutch. Like, that was the way he taught me. It was just yelling at me in Dutch, which I don't understand. So I got fired from that, and that's how I ended up farming. Is my flight home wasn't for, I think, 4 more months or something, 3 more months, or I'm not good with those kind of time. And so I thought, I can't go home right now. My dad just died. I would just be going home and being sad, waiting for my next chapter. And so I thought I'll go to somewhere I know the language and use my hands and get by.
That's such a sort of bizarre job in probably a very strange land that it was probably very helpful in a way to just have to focus on, because it forced you to kind of think about other things.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think struggle when you know you have a safety net is always a good thing. Because I'm sure I could have called my mom and she could, or I could have just gone to the airport and talked to the airline into letting me go home early. But it also was a lot of time thinking. You're watching a sail when you're sailing, or you're planting 500 seedlings of whatever is the crop that day, and that is very tedious, very lonely work that led to a lot of thought and a lot of introspection, and it was probably the right moment for that, to to really dig in and think about my dad and think about who I wanted to be and where I wanted to go from there.
And then at some point, you got a scholarship to go to Old Dominion.
Yes.
Did you apply? I mean, were you like on the boat? And I
Wi-
picture you like on the boat with some longhand sort of like writing some letter to Norfolk, like in the Royal Tannenbaums, like how he just sends the letter away. I mean, how did you even get in contact? I mean, why Old Dominion?
Well, I put it. I put it in the bottle, and I put it in, tossed it into the Atlantic, and here I am.
It washed up on the Elizabeth.
I was in South Africa when I applied, and just decided that nothing seemed more lovely than taking 3 years to just write. And so I applied to a bunch of MFA programs, and getting an MFA is also considered a terminal degree, which allows you to be a professor if you have a book published and are lucky enough to get hired. So that's how I sold myself on that, and wanted to live in the South because I was at the time trying to live in every region of the country, and I hadn't done the South yet, and foolishly thought anything below Richmond must be the South, and until I got here and realized it's not. But yeah, I got a Perry scholarship to fellowship to ODU, and I've been here ever since.
And then you started working for a local magazine. Was that Portfolio or Veer or
No, so Portfolio was on its last legs.
9 Volt, was it?
No, this is 9 Volt was already dead.
Okay.
And Veer didn't exist yet. So Hannah Serrano, my former partner, was starting a magazine that she was calling 247cities.com. So Hannah and I started dating, and I was fresh off this master's from NYU, and her original partner quit on her just after they launched the magazine. So I became her partner, and we switched it up, and it became AltDaily, and we went from there.
I think a lot of people hear editor. You're the editor of AltDaily. I think a lot of people hear editor, and myself included, I don't really know what that means in terms of a daily sort of work commitment. So what does that mean to be an editor?
Well, I'm the only employee of AltDaily, so it means everything. So I publish about 4 stories a day. So that's interacting with writers. So it's a lot of emails and people in the community, copy editing, layout, publish, social media, rinse, lather, repeat kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I try to write as much as I can find time for.
What is your process to write? Years ago, you had a process where you had sort of like a wall of cards where it was ideas in progress, ready to pitch, and then published to sort of motivate the... Is that still the process, or is it
No, that's when I thought I could make it as a freelancer. That's when writers got paid.
Right.
So it's a very different world now. No, now usually I get riled up or inspired, and then I just like find the time to write.
By being out in the thick of it and listening and hearing and speaking. You were a teacher. You've been a teacher in many different places. You were a public school teacher at one point?
Yeah, I taught public schools in New York City and Brooklyn and Bensonhurst, and in San Diego and Oceanside.
One of the things you wrote about...
And at ODU, I taught for a number of years writing.
What do you miss about teaching?
I almost said everything before I remembered the grading and bosses. I just the conversations, talking about ideas with people, with young people who are really just exploring ideas for the first time. Being able to question people, I love. I mean, hope, because that's what guides them to their true values and how they're going to end up seeing the world. I mean, writing is this magnificent journey of self-discovery, and I think we live in a world where we're allowed to have assumptions about the correctness of our views. But when you get down to writing about those views and having to support them is really when you break them down and you find out if they're real or not. And you either end up with more clarity or greater understanding or greater force behind your views. So, I mean, I really believe in the art and the exercise of essay writing and the personal essay, which is what I've mostly taught.
High school?
High school, and I taught at UConn writing, and I've taught at ODU, and I taught at a community college in New York City as well.
What's one thing that you would fix with teachers? like colleagues when you were working, and particularly maybe not in the collegiate level, but in the lower sort of high school level? What was something that you would have fixed with your colleagues in the high schools?
I didn't. It bothered me when my fellow teachers weren't inspired by the subject matter in the way that I was, because my guiding philosophy as an educator is that more so than any other skill, what you really need to be doing is fostering a love of the subject matter so that the student becomes a lifelong learner. You know, if I'm a writing or literature teacher and my student stops reading and writing after they leave my classroom, I failed, no matter how much they've done in it. So I didn't have such a critical eye at my colleagues because it's so damn hard to be a public school teacher. The standardized testing, the pressure from your supervisors to teach to those tests, 30 kids with different learning styles and different learning levels, and you know half the time you just want to stop class, close the books, and be like, I can tell you're sad. I can tell you're confused. Like, what'd your dad say to you? Who's raising you?
Yeah.
Did you eat this morning? In a place like Bensonhurst, like a lot of our poor parts of this country and this world, whether you know what a dangling participle is pretty damn irrelevant to whatever you're thinking about that day. And that's the nice thing about teaching writing, is that you can tap into people's lives, but I found it so overwhelming and had compassion for my colleagues' sense of overwhelming of you can't do it all, and you're going to fail more than you succeed as a teacher. Just by the numbers, you're not going to reach every student, and that's really heartbreaking.
So I have a few random questions to finish it out. If you could bring one thing to Norfolk that Virginia Beach has, what would it be?
I mean, in the ocean, can we just scrunch the ocean and can the ocean just wash over Virginia Beach and lap on the shores of Norfolk? I think would be ideal. But other than that, I mean,
Yeah.
the Casey Center, I think, is kind of far out.
Have you been on the roof of the Casey Center?
We should have a Chicks. I mean, it's crazy that we don't have any really fun places to eat on the water in Norfolk.
Right.
No, what's up there?
I don't know. I haven't been up there, but when I drive past it, it looks like this very tranquil spot, and there seems to be sort of like some nice groomed ivy growing along the
cool.
walls, and it looks like a place where you could just sit on a hard floor, which I know that you would like, as would I, and just sort of sit. Right?
I have not been up there. I've enjoyed their little bamboo forest many times.
Yes, that was I used to live on 85th Street, and that was my voting center.
Oh, rad.
So I would ride my bike down there. What I would bring would be the boardwalk, the bike paths, like the boardwalk to Norfolk, because we have so many waterways down by the Hague and sort of behind O'Sullivan's, or what was once O'Sullivan's. That would really, I don't know. I don't know if that would help things, but I think it would be really nice. I think that would be something that I would bring.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's First Landing, Mount Trashmore, all of their bike lanes. I think it's a much more active city that has a better park system.
What would be one thing that you would bring to Virginia Beach that Norfolk has?
A soul.
How would you describe yourself in a relationship?
Oh, for fuck's sake. I'm not good at it. I mean, I'm good at dating. I'm really good at dating, and but yeah, I don't know. I seem like an awful person to date, to be in a relationship with.
I feel like that is certainly the impression that I get from you, from what I've read of you, and I don't quite know why that is. Why? I mean, I don't know you, Jesse, but I feel like, I don't know. I guess I feel like, so I was always single, and I always wondered, in fact, I asked someone once, a friend of mine, do you think I'm a candidate to be in a relationship? Do you think I'm someone who could be in a relationship?
Uh-huh.
And I liked being alone. I was very comfortable with that, but I wanted to be in a relationship. I just didn't know how to meet people. I know you don't have a problem meeting people.
I think part of moving around so much, you get good at beginnings, but you never really get trained on sustaining and on middles and in the day-to-day. I've been, 3 middle schools, 3 high schools, went to 4 different colleges. I'm really good at the beginning, and that after that is still something that is I'm exploring, and I mean, it's hard enough to be a person. I don't know how anyone is in a relationship long term and married with kids. I don't know how anyone does it without being fat or poor or losing your mind or killing each other. It's just, that's just so much to navigate. My biggest problem, if I'm going to be frank with you, in a relationship is that, like everyone, especially like every man, I'm going to step in my own shit sometimes. And then making my partner feel bad then makes me feel really bad. And then I start questioning myself when I should be comforting them and making up for it. And then it leads to this really silly cycle.
But that's a breakdown of communication, and you're a very good communicator. There's strange that there seems to be a disconnect that when you're in a relationship that somehow the communication is it's hard for you to initiate the.
No, I think the core of why at 36 I am unmarried when that might have been a value that I once had is lack of self-awareness. I think more of a floating than set self-identity. And I think a lot of anybody's failure at anything with people is self-love. And I think it's been a really long journey of me figuring out how to appreciate, respect, and to like and love myself. And when you don't necessarily love yourself the way that you should, and you're seeking that validation elsewhere, that puts a lot of pressure on that other person. And when that relationship falters or when you see cracks in it, it becomes that's not a small fissure in a relationship. It is a crack in who you are as a person and your lovability as a person. So things that to a healthy person with healthy self-love would be something that you communicate through spirals into something much bigger that then needs to be dealt with. And then in dealing with all that emotional baggage and bullshit, you don't even really deal with a really simple thing in front of you. So you turn a fissure into a crack.
My wife said something that was really interesting, and she read about it or heard about it somewhere, that you need to know in a relationship what your relationship fuel is. So for me, how I know that she loves me is I'm an affection person. So I need, on a very basic level, I need hugs, impromptu hugs, some hand holding, some just kind of very bland static kissing when I come and go. I'd need that. That's how I know. Hers is deeds.
Mm-hmm.
So she knows that I love her through doing small deeds.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, just kind of things around the house.
Yeah.
I don't know, like a dessert or flowers or just deeds. I like deeds. I think we all share a little bit of both, but to know your particular currency
Yes.
is important. So would you be, of those two, would you be a deeds person, or are you more of a affection person?
I'm more of an affection person, I think, probably.
Are you
Like
comfortable giving affection?
Yeah, yeah. I think being heard, being listened to. I mean, this is the most I will. I'm talking more in this conversation than I probably will in the rest of the week. You know, I don't really necessarily like to talk. I don't think people really listen, and I like to listen as much as I can. You know, I know what I think. You know, this is a rare circumstance where you've asked me to talk, so I believe that you were listening and curious. But generally, I think people are just so caught up in their own stink that I don't really bother talking as much as possible. And there's a real gift to listening. You know, as I blather on until you interrupt me every time. Just I think everyone's like that. We're just so much comes out when you're allowed to have beyond the first sentence, beyond the first quip, that I try to give that gift to people as much as possible. And I have no idea what the question was or how that started at this point.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. I'm working
No,
on
you
that.
haven't interrupted
Oh, okay.
at all. But
I talked to someone about you, and one of the things that they said was that you have a remarkable ability to stay friends with your exes. That's something that I don't have. and what the hell do I know? But from reading your blog in particular, I think perhaps that's because they taught you about you, and that is something that is very valuable to you, and I think probably helps you stay friends.
Yeah, I mean, I have a great appreciation for the women that I've been in relationships with. I respect them, I love them, I admire them, I miss them. I have not fallen completely out of love with any woman that I've been in love with. And I think part of that is having a really unstable family growing up. I didn't have, there's been a lot of like places at the table where there should be people that were empty that I've kind of filled with those kind of relationships. And, I mean, I loved them for real. I didn't love my girlfriends for what they did for me or what they gave for me. And I don't know how to completely, I don't know how to hate someone I loved that much or how to turn it off completely.
What happened to your front tooth?
I lost it sledding when I was little, and I've had a fake one. And then the last year or the year before last, I was toothless.
Was it a plastic sled or the old school
Plastic,
one with
plastic
runners?
sled, yeah.
Have you written about that?
No, I haven't.
You've got a wicked picture on Instagram and probably other places of the screw
Yeah.
and the X-ray. Do you ever use that as like a costume kind of Halloween thing, like where you could?
No, it doesn't come out anymore.
Okay.
But it was a great year without the tooth. It was an exercise in ego abatement.
Do you like coffee?
Yes.
What how do you take it?
Just like my dad with sugar and cream, lots of it.
As you know, there's something when you read something, you feel like you have a perception or a feeling about something, and then you read it from someone else that shares that, and then there's that bond that happened, and that happened with me and you, with people who cut their sideburns too short. And I have this theory, and it's proven true so far, that a sure sign of someone you cannot trust is someone who has no sideburns, who cuts them like at the ear line.
Uh-huh.
And so next time you find yourself in line somewhere or wherever, just keep your eye out for that. Because you wrote about how people who shave their sideburns too high is gross, which it is gross, but I'm going to up the ante and say that they should not be trusted. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it might be an antisocial act.
That's all I have.
Good. Stopped me just short of talking about the military, which is probably a good ending point.
Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, I think it's probably that's a thing that we can talk about off air, and still be employed around town. Jesse, I really, really appreciate this a lot. I appreciate what you've done for this area, and I feel like honestly, you individually have done so much. Not only just with AltDaily, but with the Arts District and running for City Council. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you. I feel like I'm part of a movement, so I wouldn't take any sole credit for anything. But thank you. I've enjoyed this. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse. I'll see you downtown. This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you've been listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. To hear archived episodes, go to soundcloud.com/QAAPC or subscribe to the show on iTunes. For exclusive content, including upcoming shows, behind-the-scenes pictures, and more, follow the show on Instagram at instagram.com/QAAPC. The executive producer of the Q&A with A.P.C. is Ben Riley.